Welcome back, guys. We got to talk about it. Did BDS get shafted by the tiebreaking rules in the RLCS? So I'm going to explain why the tiebreaker rules are the way they are, what happened last year with the tiebreaker rules, and all of that. We're finally making a video on YouTube. I haven't done this in a while, so bear with me. Hopefully everything sounds good. I think it will. So let's talk about what happened today. Basically, BDS had a better game differential. I believe it was +4 or +3. I can't remember. Over Quadrant. They both finished 2-1. Quadrant finished with +1, but Quadrant got first place in the group because they won the head-to-head versus BDS. Quadrant was in a very odd situation because Group B was all tied 1-1 going into the last round. So really what it came down to is you got to win your match or lose it and then hope that the team you beat earlier matches what you do so you get a benefit out of it. It's probably the worst case that you could have when talking about head-to-head tiebreakers. Basically, Quadrant was a Game 5 overtime away from either being last place in the group because they lost to Tundra earlier, and Tundra was down in the 1-2, or being first place in the group because they beat BDS earlier. Quadrant won that game, went on to be the number 1 seed. BDS got the 2 seed. BDS then lost in the first round of the playoffs, which basically eliminates them from major contention, realistically, unless they win the last event or something like that. So BDS fans, obviously not happy. Fans in general are a little bit confused, or there's a lot of arguments going on Twitter. Should you go with head-to-head? Should you go with group game differential? And so let's explain what it is. Last year, really quick, we tried this format of tiebreakers. Now, tiebreakers was kind of like a unique middle ground, because basically what we did was last year was group game differential, because generally that's what we've always done. We've always done game differential in our league play formats when there's a lot more teams in there. So when there's 8 teams in it, game differential makes a little bit more sense. There is more ties anyway in general. So we went with that as your overall performance in the league rather than head-to-head. And we did that for 5 years. Then on the other side, the problem with game differential, which I'll get to in a little bit, in a 4-way group, it does lead to odd things that can happen. So tiebreakers were introduced because the importance of the 1 seed, the importance of the 4 seed felt like, hey, let's play an extra game. Clearly, that didn't go over well. A lot of complaints last season, a lot of people confused, just didn't make a lot of sense. Fair enough. I'll take the L on that one because tiebreakers were kind of my baby. So now we go, should we do head-to-head or game differential going forward in groups of 4? And I think when you just are asked that question right away, I'm probably on the side of game differential. But when you look at it on paper of what could possibly happen, I then change, I believe, to head-to-head. So let's explain why. So let's just get into it. First off, here's what our current tiebreakers are. They are head-to-head first and foremost. A lot of people are confused because it doesn't say head-to-head on our tiebreaker sheet, but it does. Match record is obviously first, which means like, hey, if you finish 2-1 in the group, someone else finishes 2-1 in the group, you have to then move down on tiebreakers. I'm not even sure if you really need to list that one, but we do. Number 2 is your head-to-head. Game differential against tied teams. That is head-to-head. The reason why it is worded that way is so if there's a 3-way tie, you can say head-to-head still in less words, basically. Because you can't just say, oh, we go to head-to-head. Then do you do head-to-head with game differential? It just sounds better. Game differential, it's like against tied teams. So either way, 3-way tie, you go to head-to-head. There is now 2 matchups for each of those teams. What was their game differential in those? So it is still based on that head-to-head. You know, +2, -2, 0, yada, yada. And if it is just head-to-head, there's only 1 match. So you just go, hey, it's a 3-1, +2 game differential versus -2. You move on that team. Then after that, if all teams are still tied, it goes to game differential. Then it goes down to where you started in the tournament, which we never want to get there. Like initial seed, not a great tiebreaker, but you have to have it just in case. One thing we do, and this is very... So this is what they do in the NFL, is if there's ever a time when someone breaks away from that tie, you reset tiebreakers. Because basically what you want is whatever tiebreaker you think is most valuable, you want to use as often as you possibly can, right? So in this case, for this season, head-to-head is the most valuable tiebreaker. So if in game differential against tied teams, if one team is at 2, and 2 teams are at -1, like instead of going to group game differential next, you reset those two teams at -1 because the team that had +2 has broken away and they're out. And this could be on the opposite side too. Like if a team was -2, they're broken away in third place. Then you move on to the two teams tied at 1-1. So that's why we do it that way. Because again, you don't want it to come down to, well, BDS was seeded #1 coming into this tournament, Quadrant was seeded #9 or something like that. So we just automatically move them on. Like that would just feel terrible. So you try and avoid that as much as possible by trying to do a reset on tiebreakers. Now that could possibly happen if everything is tied across the board, but hey, that is what it is. So that's the rule in there. I know it's cut off a tiny bit because of my body, but too bad. So that's how that one works. That is why it is explained in that way. I think a lot of people were confused because they think three-way ties go to group game differential first, which they do not. And I think that is a very important factor. You cannot have two different tiebreakers for a three-way tie versus a two-way tie. If you want that, go back to Season 2 of RLCS. 59 is not bigger than whatever it was. So go ask Johnny Boy about the flip side thing, because that's what happened there. You want to avoid that at all costs. Moving on. Let's go over overall strength. And we're going to compare game differential and head-to-head in these things. So game differential first shows overall strength better across the whole group. I think that is true for the most part. I think some people make the argument that head-to-head could still show that they are better than the other team, because if you're only tied with them and you beat them, there's still a small argument, I think, there. But I think for the most part, people think, like, if you just want the team that was better in groups in general, you go with game differential over head-to-head. But I think there is a small contingency that think like head-to-head is the way it is. And I think this really comes down to a lot of the NA philosophy versus the EU philosophy. A lot of EU leagues, I think, go to goal differential and stuff like that, except for a Champions League, I think, which is head-to-head. In NA, it's way more focused on if you tie someone, if you did better than them in the games that you played against them, then you are the better team. So I think there is a little bit of weird philosophy behind that, of like more North American players will probably be like, no, I'd rather head-to-head, while European players would probably want more of a group game differential. So overall strength, I would side more on the game differential side, and I think here's where you look at it without diving deep, and I'm like, yes, I want game differential. And this is why I like game differential in league play with bigger groups and all of that. Moving on. Competitive integrity. Now, this one is huge. And I think here is why you would go head-to-head over a game differential. And I'll get into the examples here in a bit. So head-to-head to overall keeps teams in contention. I think I had a typo there, but whatever. For both the #1 and 4 leading into less meaningless games. So basically, it keeps everyone alive in the group for longer. And that is very important because you never want to have one team playing a completely meaningless game while the other team is playing a very important game against each other. That is something you want to avoid at all costs because that's going to throw an entire group out the window. That's going to happen in a league play, obviously. Like, you can't really change that, but at least it means less because there's a lot more games to be played in a group play spot. But in a group of 4 teams, that's 33% of your group could be played in a weird, like, one team that doesn't even care if they win or lose, while the other team, it means literally everything. And that feels kind of bad. If you do game differential, that can result in lopsided matches that matter for one and not for the other. And I'll get into examples here. And this is I would say, the more important thing compared to when we're talking about overall, like, who was better in the group or head-to-head or yada, yada, yada. So you assume matches are played at the same time, because I think there's probably some cases with head-to-head where, like, then there's going to be a little bit of meaningless matches, but I didn't want to dive too deep into that because generally our groups are played at the same time. So teams going into it know if they're alive or not. The only time in head-to-head when you get a meaningless game is when a 2-0 plays an 0-2. If that happens, both teams don't care about the match at all. 2-0 is guaranteed #1, and 0-2 is guaranteed #4. So, sure, like, it is meaningless, and it's not great, but at least both teams don't care about it, right? Both teams are already out. So it's not a huge deal if one team wins or whatever. So that one isn't that bad. You're like, all right, when we talk about the competitive integrity, it is not affected in this matchup. Moving on, though, when you talk about group differential integrity, this happens actually more than you would think. I don't have, like, prime examples here, but I think it probably could have happened through today, like, if we look through the groups, but I didn't go that deep into it because I didn't have enough time. But basically, many matches can have lopsided meanings for teams. A normal example is if you're 2-0 or 0-2 and you start off really good. So like 2-0, 3-0, 3-0. You're like, I got this game differential on lock. I'm way higher than everyone else. They could be locked in to number one before they play their final game. Say, for example, the 2-0 has beat both 1-1 teams, 3-0, 3-0, right? Which can happen very, very easily. Those 1-1 teams both beat the 0-2 team 2-3, or even 1-3. Like, it doesn't even really matter, or 3-1, I should say. Both those teams now are at like -2 game differential, -1 game differential. Say, like, even if both of them did a 3-1, -1 game differential on both, right? Now you go into that final matchup where the 0-2 is sitting at -4 game differential, where they need to win this game against 2-0, obviously. The 2-0, though, is sitting there, and they're like, we're at +6. We can only go down to +3. Neither one of those 1-1s, even if they sweep in their match, can catch us. So we've locked in number one. We don't care. We're just going to play, have fun, whatever. Those 1-1s are fighting for their lives. The 0-2 is fighting for their life, because if they 3-0 that 2-0 team, now they're sitting at -1. And that's if it was 3-1, 3-1, which could very easily be 3-2, 3-2, and it's a lot closer. But say that's the case. Like, if it's 3-2, 3-2, all they have to do is beat the 2-0 and they're in, which obviously a 2-0 is not going to play the same when they know they've locked in number one. Like, sure, players are going to go on the field and play their game, but if they know they're locked in number one, it's just a different mentality. So say it is -4, so the odd case of that, or like a further out case. If they 3-0, they're at -1. Both the 1-1 teams were at -2, right? I believe 3-0, yeah. 3-0 and then a 3-1 or a -1, but they'll fall to at least a -2, right? So as long as it's not a 3-2 in that case for the 1-1s, if it's a 3-1 in either way, that 0-2 is now in, and one of those 1-1s goes home. And those 1-1s are sitting there like, hey, we played this team that came in first that dominated this entire group. We lost them 3-0 because they're the best team in the world. They're a Gen G, right? Even though that's not a good example because their day ones are terrible. But we're playing the best team in the world, and this 0-2 team that comes out is now 1-2 because they got to play a team that didn't care. Like, that's not the same team that we played earlier. And that's 1/3 of your entire group stage. So that's where things get hairy and where things can result in bad matchups. Now, this can happen the exact same way with 0-2. 0-2 gets swept 0-3, 0-3. They're out of the tournament. They're going into their final matchup, and who knows? Maybe that actually helps an 0-2. I don't know. But they're playing a 1-1 team that needs a win. Not only a win, but they might need a lot of games as well. So obviously they want a 3-0 to match their opponents and try and catch up and maybe even play for first. Like, who knows? While the 0-2 team's in there, like, one, we could just forfeit because, like, who cares? We're done. We hate this. So there's one mentality. So they could, so that 1-1 could just get an even easier 3-0. Or that 0-2 comes in like, we're out. Let's just play for fun. Carefree. Mentality's out the window. Who cares? Let's just have a good time. Maybe they actually play better. Who knows? But it does throw things for a loop, right? And I think that's where game differential, while on paper or when you look at it from a far point of view, looks fantastic. And that's what you would, I think, normally want to do. And even myself, like I was on Twitter, I'm like, I prefer game differential. And then I forgot. I was like, oh yeah, but there are cases like this. And I have brought this up before. Probably on Reddit, like go check my post or whatever. That, like, yes, when you look at it through a microscope, though, game differential in a group of 4 is not that great because of this. Now, we can compare worst case. We kind of talked about this already. Like, worst case, we saw today probably with Quadrant where, like, they can get first in a Game 5 overtime or last. And that is the worst case, right? 4 teams, 1-1, where literally it's out of their hands. Like, obviously, win or lose is good, and that helps for first or second or third and fourth, but they literally don't get to choose first or second or third or fourth. They just it's completely random. They just got to hope that the team that they match up with, they already beat. And that's where you can, like, fall into those spots where you're 1 goal away from first, 1 goal away from coming in fourth. Now, that can happen in a game differential as well, where the game differentials are very tight between all those teams. Everyone's 1-1. If Quadrant wins this Game 5, they can come in first with a +1 game differential. And if they lose, they can come in last with a -1 game differential. That could happen. It's more rare, but it can definitely happen. While in head-to-head, 4 teams tied at 1-1 is rare as well, but it's not as rare as exact same game differentials. So that's like worst case in head-to-head. Worst case, though, in the game differential or group differential is a 2-0 team, literally nothing to play for at this point. A 1-1 team gets an easy win, maybe like a 3-1 over a 2-0 that has dominated this entire group, because 2-0 knows we're in first anyway. So let's put on a clown car, let's put on our clown outfits, and let's have a grand old time. Like, sure, they're not going to come out in clown outfits, but they're not going to play the same Rocket League when they know they locked in number 1. Maybe some teams do, maybe some don't, but that's 33% of your group. You're playing against a team where the result does not matter. And I think that is where you side towards head-to-head. And I get, maybe on paper, and especially for EU people, they're going to be like, no way. Like, you always go group game differential no matter what, because that shows, that you're the better team, yada, yada, yada. And I think there still is the case on both sides in that. And I think this is the end of this, right? Oh, yeah. So here we go. Here's my last slide. I love my PowerPoint slides. It's just a lot easier for me. Head-to-head is favored in competitive integrity. Worst case as well, which is basically the same thing, really. So really, it's just competitive integrity versus overall, are you better in a group? I'm going to side to competitive integrity of making sure that that is good, rather than are you better in an entire group format, when there still is some arguments where people say you're not stronger than that other team because that other team beat you. There is arguments for that. I don't necessarily agree. I think group differential would show that you are the better team. But because of competitive integrity in 4-team groups, I think you have to side to the head-to-head side. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and we can talk through it a little bit more. Like, I know there was one in Sam that happened. I think it was Sam, or maybe it was somewhere else. I think it was Sam, yeah. It was LSL, no ties in Final Form, where they had a weird tiebreaker where it had to actually reset. A lot of people thought Final Form should have been the 3rd team in because their group differential was -3. No ties was -4. But again, Final Form in head-to-head, the game differential, they were both -1. Then it comes down to head-to-head after that because you have to reset. No ties beat them. That's why they were in. That was just one scenario. But feel free to throw some in the comments below of what your thoughts are. But like, I think pretty much overall, I think winter format in general, groups, I don't think it's worth the pain of groups personally. Like, I kind of like formats that, like, if you win, you're still in the tournament. If you lose a life at least, or maybe a go home, right? And that's how it works in fall format, in spring format. You lose and you go home, or you lose a life at least. In groups, it's not really like that. Groups is a little weird. I think groups on paper looks good because you're like, all right, we can plan for the 3 teams. It's good for coaches, I would say. You can plan for the 3 teams and try and do your best. But then you still have to play a bracket game anyway, like if you fall into that 2-3 round. While you can kind of do that in double elim anyway, or maybe you do double elim groups. I hate double elim groups because 2 and 3 seeds normally just rematch again. So it would have to be 18 groups, which then it's hard to plan for all those matchups. Then you're basically just doing double elim to your top 8 anyway, and then you have 1 life again. So I don't know. Maybe groups is not the way to go. I personally would be very happy if there was no more groups. But let me know what you think. Pros, coaches, just casual fans. I just want to hear your thoughts, but tried to explain this as best as I possibly could. And I hope this all makes sense. And I think that is why they went with head-to-head over a game differential or group game differential. But that's it for me. Thank you for watching my once a month, maybe once a quarter video on YouTube. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.